One by one the men passed by. The patio stayed mostly empty. The people waiting to greet their relatives or friends were waiting by the side or inside. Glancing at the distorted faces, soaked bandages and half-broken carriages, one wouldn't think of it as a victory. You recognized a few men, mostly those out of the total 30 soldiers who could walk upright and showed little sign of injury. There were no cheers, and he was grateful for it. It was to be expected every second man to have fallen. Who exactly couldn't be seen yet, because the order in which they arrived was broken up into smaller groups of 3 to 5 people, and many came in alone. Dew could spot Josephine next to him, tears streaming down her face. The carriage came to a stop in the center of the patio. Women in white gowns quickly collected around it and soon afterwards disappeared together with figures on stretchers. From the past couple of times you knew they went to the hospital-like wing to, mostly unsuccessfully, stitch up those who were too weak to walk. "Look," he muttered in Josephine's direction. "There he is." On the last stretch he could clearly see the long man with semi-long brown hair being carried away. He could hear a high-pitched noise from her before she began floating after the wounded, yet halfway over the patio she stopped, turned around and looked at Dew. "Does she need my approval or what?" he thought himself as he waved her away. Relieved, she continued on and disappeared into the door with everyone else. Dew found a bench next to the kitchen door. Like usual, he sat there, his palm supporting his cheek, and waited. He saw Aaron hasting by, his torn cape fluttering behind him, and without his armor, another man following close behind him in the same attire. Dew recognized him as being the one who used to be Avery's general. Another soldier went by, limping on his right foot. It was one out of the 2 guards which had picked up the corpse of the guard who had overdosed in the dining room. The other ones he knew from nothing but sight. Slowly everyone dispersed into the warmth inside the building. Dew kept waiting. His hand went into the inside of the cape and pulled out all 3 of the throwing knives. One was still soaked with color which had turned brown. Sticking his finger into the ring on the end of the hilt, he began twirling it around for a mild entertainment. Hopefully the little blade had caused the man a nasty experience during his hunt. Hopefully he was dying to it or anything else. After 5 minutes, no one came in or out through the gate anymore. The patio lay in silence. Dew had put the knife to the side and spent his time staring at the brownish snow with the many footprints. The door next to him opened and Frederick looked outside. Dew put little notice to it. "It's cold," the man said. "Mm-hmm." He didn't even turn towards his chef. "It's warm inside." "Probably." His chef held the door open. The one outside continued to feel the other one's eyes on him. "Do you want to come inside?" Frederick then asked directly, but without impatience. "Not really." Some seconds passed until Dew heard a clicking noise and the door was closed again, and he sighed. A tiny cloud of steam formed itself before his face until dispersing into nothingness. He went inside after he stopped feeling his toes. His numb feet led him towards where Josephine had gone. The hospital wing was a corridor with 4 rooms, with 3 beds each lined up in a row. A 5th room stored the medical supplies. Herbs against stomach aches, bandages Dew regularly stole for his personal needs, ointments for burns which could also be used against sunburns, tools to close up wounds or amputate infected limbs, and much more. Not without reason, Bota was known for its comparably good health treatments. Josephine was waiting outside of one of the rooms. The door was closed, but the screams from the inside could not be covered. They wanted to ask if it was Patrick inside there, but looking at the woman's horrid expression, the question answered itself, so he asked, "What is it?" "His arm," she answered after a moment. "It has to go." "Damn, is it that bad?" There was no answer. She turned her head downwards and leaned against the wall. Dew decided to accompany her as if he would be a suited person. With much self-control he stopped himself from commenting. At least he returned. After 20 minutes, when the screams had already faded to a faint growl, the door opened and one of the women in white stepped outside, her once green robe splattered with blood. Josephine nearly fainted, but he went to grab her under the arms so her head wouldn't hit the hard stone. "He is resting now. Maybe he will make it," the nurse softly reported. "You may see him, but don't touch anything, or Nurse Fatima might ban you from visiting the hospital altogether." She floated away into the next room. Josephine slowly caught herself. "Do you want to go?" he asked, while trying to get a glimpse through the crack of the door. She groaned, holding her head. "Please, if you can, go first and tell me how bad it is." Dew reassured the woman was capable of standing on her own before heading for the door. The evening light fell through the windows on the west side. The pal, which was supposed to be a charismatic soldier and father, was all the way on the bed in the left-hand corner. 2 more nurses were chatting quietly on the opposite side. An unstable wooden chair was placed next to each bed. Dew heavily sank down on it, placing his hands on his knees and bending forwards. It was his right arm which had been reduced to a short stump, thickly wrapped but still soaked. Patrick wore no more armor, not even a shirt. Dew assumed there to be stitched-up gashes underneath the countless tiny bundles of cloth placed all over his chest, but he was breathing and conscious. His eyes, slightly opened, found the one sitting by his bed as soon as Dew sat down. Patrick must have recognized him because he averted his gaze to face the wall while sighing. "Your wife is outside. What should I tell her?" Dew began. He eyed the man's messy and tangled hair, the scratches all over his face and torso, and a mass of bloody flesh with splinters of yellow bone in a simple metal bucket standing next to the bed. The fingers were barely to be recognized as such. The different kinds of tissue were morphed into one gruesome sight. "Just vaguely tell her what you see, and that'll be fine," Patrick groaned. "Should she come in?" "Is the arm still here?" He looked at the bucket. "I can cover that up," Dew offered. "Then I'd like to see my darling." Moments later, Josephine had switched places with Dew's, covering by her husband's side, sobbing loudly, and Dew stood by the side, secretly rolling his eyes. Her cries of insisting on the cruelty of life and how unfair it treated her husband bothered him. The words of self-pitying by Patrick made him want to vomit. "So what happened with that arm of yours?" he harshly interrupted the lovers. "Dew, how can you—" Josephine began, but Patrick cut her off. "It was in the big city. Things went wrong there. Do you want to hear the full story?" "Can you talk about it later, or not at all? I'm sure his wife will be glad to—" Dew bursted out into laughter, real and wild laughter, startling the woman and having Patrick's face flood with agony. "I'd like to hear every single detail from you. I don't care if it's now or later. Take your time if you need to. I'll be waiting. It's not like I have anyone to return to," Dew loudly claimed, already turning around to leave. "You are saying that—" Dew slammed the door shut, not wanting to hear another word from the woman who had everything she could wish for except for a single arm. 2 hours later, Josephine knocked at Dew's door. In her face he could see her temptation of talking, but luckily she stayed quiet. She wouldn't understand anyway, and he would just end up shouting at her. He himself felt calm outside of her company. Sitting next to Patrick with no one else in the room made him realize how unbothered he felt. It was good. He didn't want to feel the desperation of those 5 days again. "I hope you know everything I'm hoping for," Dew began, staring down at the pale, fragile man. So do I, trust me." "Then talk." Dew crossed his arms, his lower eyelid twitching. Patrick appeared to be repositioning himself, but he had little room to move, with all his injuries, which a city guard such as him could not ignore. "Talk," he repeated with more urgency. "All right, I get it. You deserve to know, and I'm your safest option right now, right?" A stare was enough to quiet the soldier's nonsense down. "Okay, here we go. So, we continue on after the fortress. You know about that, right? We hear that there is no one in that big city that triggered the whole war thing. Then we arrive, it's right, no one's there. We were stationed everywhere inside the place, while some went to search for any nobles left and build a new government, because the inhabitants were incredibly nervous. We noticed that the locals were weird, because they were mostly sick or old, but ignore that. Night falls, everything is quiet. General Aaron says he'll write the report, so he goes outside the wall, yes, there's a wall, to send the message. And suddenly everything exploded. Like everything. The wall, the houses, the streets, and the people. I was in a place where the explosion was a couple of meters away. I couldn't hear for a while, and was hit by a couple of rocks, so that's where most of my arm went missing. The next problem was the fire. Imagine almost everything is gone already, and everyone is screaming and crying and weeping. Rubble and all that buried the people who survived the explosion, and a huge part in the middle of the city is fully torn open because there used to be the underground trade markets. Now the leftovers are also burning away, and you can barely breathe. The generals are all too scattered to yell their commands, so we are all very disoriented. It got even worse when someone suddenly shouted that there were enemy armies coming from every side, like the entire army is in that destroyed city, completely surrounded, and more than half of us are already dead. With my arm, I couldn't fight at all. Well, so I'm mostly just running with the others to get to the other knights and hope for someone to tell us what to do. Now, this was a little embarrassing. On my way I trip and probably break my bone, and I can't tolerate that. I see the enemies approaching, can't move, and suddenly someone yanks me up by the collar and drags me to the side. I can't do much, so I just lean against the collapsed wall and see those 8 people, 2 of them Aaron and your wife, facing the troop of about 20 people, and it didn't look like it was their first time being involved in a battle that night. Well, they were doing pretty good until there's a loud bang from a roof nearby. One of the women in armor split up because 3 of the guys were shot dead already, and I think Ivy took a bullet or 2 as well. The woman must have taken out the shooter because that stopped, and with 4 people left and the enemies dead, they went on. Or rather, 3 of them went on. Ivy, or whatever her name was, picked me up without a word to get me to the building where most of us went. Before we could reach it, though, she gave me to another knight who got me to safety. As a group of 50, we used the underground tunnels to get out and reassemble. Others followed, and the ones capable of fighting took out the enemies on the outside. Weirdly enough, some of the enemy madmen actually went inside the fire for some reason. Probably miscommunication, if you ask me. 100 or 200 were still on the inside, but we didn't risk going in the area again, because at this point flames were burning so high, even outside it was hard to breathe. We thought they would come outside once they noticed it as well. What we didn't expect was everything left would collapse by another explosion. Like, we watched the walls burn and everything inside, but then there is this wind which sucked everything into a flaming spiral before it expanded, and just everything not deeply anchored in the ground was taken. That's where my arm was destroyed completely, beyond saving, but I only learned that on our way back. We had to clean up a lot, search for survivors, burn the corpses and all that. Let me guess, Du snarled. You noticed your savior to be dead on your way back, because you were knocked out for most of it? I saw her. He looked up in surprise after having stared at Patrick's functioning arm throughout the recount. The man lifted his arm, gesturing as if he was trying to grasp what to say, with his mouth slightly opened and hypothetically ready to talk. He began. I saw her by the burning pile while I was transferred to a different area for provisionally treatment for my leg and arm. They put all the bodies in a round and just... How did she look like? Du demanded to know from him as soon as he figured the night meant he saw the corpse. Patrick searched for words. Broken. Her wings were bent in direction I never knew they could. Her face was fully covered in blood. She was still wearing her armor at that point, so I couldn't see any other injuries but the blood on her. It could have been hers or that of anyone else. What about her eyes? Patrick shrugged, but twitched in pain at the uncomfortable movement. I don't know. They were closed. They did that to all before stripping and throwing them into the fire. I see, Du replied monotonously. Patrick sighed horridly. I'm sorry, I wish I could have helped. Can I do anything for you? A drink or... Knowing that you will take part of the blame is enough of a price for me. Get well soon or something. Du stood up, ready to leave, but he called after him. I really regret her death. She has done much more for me than just during that night, and I'll never forget it. A heavy breath shook Dew's body. You better. The door fell shut. During his last shift he wasn't the one falling into cramps of crying, but Josephine was. He tried to ignore her. Luckily she didn't begin to talk to him at all, so it was more than simple to complete his task, go into the dining hall and return to a mostly empty kitchen. Frederick, for once, actually began cleaning the kitchen and putting the utensils into their place. Wordlessly, Dew took his position by the sink, letting the small man finish everything else. Throwing the towel onto the table, he wanted to leave already, but he was stopped by Frederick. Josephine broke down after you left and told us everything, he began, causing Dew to roll his eyes. When did she not break down? I just want to ask, want something to drink? Dew leaned against the table, holding his head. For the first time that day he noticed how little he had drunk or eaten, and how it had his head throb with pain. "All right," he declared. Immediately Frederick got off the stool he had stood on and left through the main door, leaving Dew with the question why he didn't just use water from the barrel. Not too long after he returned with 2 exquisite-looking glasses and a bottle in his hand. So it was alcohol Frederick had talked about. The two went upstairs to take a seat by the group table. Frederick placed a glass before Dew, stood on the chair across from him, and poured both of them half a glass. The liquid was transparent and colorless. The Merling lifted an eyebrow, having expected wine or juice instead of a plain liquid in an extraordinary bottle. He watched as Frederick took a generous sip from his own glass and sighed as he put it down. "You talked to Josephine's asparagus. Why's that?" he asked after the drink had run down his throat. "I wanted to know what had happened. Isn't that logical?" "I'm just thinking, isn't it a little too early to go that far into detail?" Dew blew his nose. "Do you think I'd let the guy my partner died for have a relaxing day?" "I'm not talking about him, I'm talking about you. Isn't it too early for you to think about it?" Frederick corrected. "For me? In what world would it be enough to hear someone you deeply cared for died and you don't even get to know why? I'm glad to know all of this shit," he spat harshly. His hand closed around the glass, guiding it towards his lips. Not considering anything further, he let the fluid into his mouth and down into his stomach. It was as if he had cold fire in his mouth. His tongue, neck, nose, and even lungs burned with the sheer bitterness which had just entered his body, and he coughed as if his life depended on it. "What is this hellish drink? I thought you wanted me to get some water, something with a calming effect," he shouted hoarsely, holding his neck while trying to force out the last few drops still lingering in his mouth. "Isn't this a drink your sorrows away situation?" Frederick wondered. Dew slammed his fist onto the table during his desperate choking. "No, this is a please give me something light and edible or I might starve myself to death situation." "Oh." He still felt the burning even after 20 minutes of silently sitting in front of his chef, who didn't dare to talk either. Dew felt numb. His flesh and bones, limbs, organs, and especially head felt like nothing more than an unconventional ballast for his existence, which he wished to get rid of. He imagined how it must feel like, being free of all the limitations and feelings the flesh suit he was stuck in must feel like. To him there was no doubt that it must be wonderful, and if not that, it would at least be freeing. Only in the enclosure of his room did Dew notice how tired he was. It was as if the weight of several bags of flour was pressing down on his back, which had him sink into the bed like a stone. It was cold. The sheets were cold even after he wrapped himself in them. He was cold. And there was a space which was large and empty all around him, and no one to fill it. Dew pushed himself into a corner against the wall. He felt the hard resistance which gave no comfort. There was no one. He was alone. There would be no one. Or maybe there would be, but no one he would have wanted to. But he didn't want that. He didn't want there to be no one. He wanted company. He didn't want to be alone, and his body ached because no matter what he wanted, he was all on his own, with no loving hand or caring gesture in reach but one. It wouldn't be loving or caring. It would be the cold metal against his neck. His hand reached for the knife, held it before him, and the shining reflection of the full moon blinded his eyes as he threw it straight across the room, because he didn't want it. He didn't want to die as pitiful as this. His arms closed around the pillow, he held it tightly to his empty chest and hid his face, which he knew was blue and red and hot, but cold at the same time. Hugh couldn't bear it. He couldn't bear the sudden realization that he was on his own with no future. So he jumped up, saw the knife in the opposite corner, but forced himself to ignore it, to instead go towards the chest. He forced it open with the little strength his weak limbs had left and dug through the items. There was no one to care for tidiness anyway. His hand closed around the tiny bundle with sturdy content. He almost tore the cloth as he opened it, stuck his hand inside, and pulled out one of the tiny round roots. The sour bitterness filled his mouth as the wet juice of it ran through him, numbing his mind as well. He barely made it to his bed before everything inside him gave up, and he was at peace.